With permission of our team leader, Mr. Tariq Pervez, let me welcome former Senator and Federal Minister Javed Jabbar for giving us this great honor to talk to this team of National Initiative Against Organized Crime. We are working on a project which is how to deal with countering and how to deal with extremism in long term, and especially find gaps in laws and constitution and policies that Pakistan has pursued over a period of time that has led to this state of extremism in our society. So our team comprises the team leader, Mr. Tariq Pervez, former DG FIA and first head of National Counterterrorism Authority. We have Mr. Javed Akhtar from West Yorkshire Police, a former Deputy Chief Constable of West Yorkshire Police. We have our lead researcher, Mr. Kashif Noon, the Deputy Inspector General of Police from Punjab, Shahzada Sultan, is also part of the team. And our researchers and assistants, Anam Fatma and Fatma Saif, are also part of the team. Thank you very much, Senator Javed Jabbar, for your time. Let us start by getting your views on what you think are the causes of this extreme in our society from the perspective of the political and other developments. We are focusing especially on religious extremism, which is hate speech, which is sectarian violence, blasphemy, forced marriages. Those are the areas of our concern that we are focusing. So we would like to hear your perspective initially as an introduction. What do you feel are the reasons for this extremism in Pakistan? Senator Javed Jabbar.
Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. Thank you, Mr. Tariq Khosa, for your gracious invitation and your introduction. And distinguished colleagues in this group, it's a privilege for me to be interacting with you. Each of you has a very rich and interesting, varied set of experiences in looking at this subject. So you are far better able to address the issue. I will simply start and proceed for about, 10 to 12 minutes at the most, Tariq Saab. Is that all right? 10 to 12 minutes? You should be sound asleep by the end of 12 minutes, so I can wake you up once I'm through, and then I'll benefit from your responses. I just want to begin by saying, friends, that this phenomenon of extremism, while it is a subject rife for the 21st century, is a historic, timeless process. It's rooted in human nature. This tremendous conflict between what human nature is and how religious texts and prophets, and most especially the greatest man who ever lived, and the message of the Quran, is this striving for balance. Balance, which is the very fundamental principle of the universe and of nature, is often missing in God's vice regent on earth. So this is a timeless process, but also it is very close to us. The eminent historian Eric Hobsbawm published a book about 20 years ago called The Age of Extremism. And he looks at the period between 1914 and 1941, about half a century, as representing a new kind of extremism that unleashed itself in the form of two terribly destructive world wars, the forces of communism, and the reaction from capitalism, fascism, and so on. So the age of extremism, on the one hand, is timeless, and on the other, it is as contemporary as the 20th century, and now it advances into the 21st century. But in the context of Pakistan, what fascinates me is that on the one hand, one sees a population that is overwhelmingly pluralist, moderate, balanced, despite this excessive show of religiosity which of course was spurred by General Ziaul Haq, but which has always been there, the desire to wear religion on our sleeves, the desire to demonstrate that we are pious Muslims or Christians or whatever. Religiosity has been part of the social fabric. Yet when we move around this country, apart from the religiosity and the proliferation of mosques, uh, you also sense this reasonableness in the people, a remarkable cosmopolitanism that does not just confine itself to DHA or Clifton in Karachi. I mean, you go into a bus at Empress Market or somewhere, and you find songs from the West playing, and people just taking it in their stride, regardless of whether they understand it or they don't understand it. So, in a country that is really basically very reasonable and balanced, how over the past 30, 40 years, if not from the very beginning, the state and society, and I hold society as responsible as the state, if not more so, because it is society that creates the state. It is society that votes. It's the society that determines by its behavior how the state will eventually behave. How we have been consistently retreating, this balanced, reasonable, cosmopolitan minded people constantly retreating in the face of a minority of extremists. First of all, non-violent extremists, which is the nursery bed for violent extremism. But we do not, in time, we have never checked them in time. The non-violent extremism, the most obvious manifestation is madrasas. But I don't want to demonize madrasas. You find non-violent extremism in very unlikely places. You find it among supposedly educated people. You find it in government schools that are not meant to be madrasas, but my God, the way the teachers hold forth could be worse than the narrow-mindedness of madrasas. So you find it in different kinds of places. And this non-violent extremism and this inability to desist and to stare the extremists in their eyes, in their face, and face them down has been a major reason why today we face extremism as a threat that is rampant. At the same time, it is a sum which is larger than its parts, because when you break it down, uh, on the one hand, we have a very vibrant, visible, audible set of media, whether it is conventional media or social media. Uh, there is not a country where women are blocked from view. In fact, women qualify even more than men to be hosts of talk shows or whatever, morning shows. Women are all over the place in our media. This is not a society that is so extreme that it represses women. It is a society where millions of women are still repressed and still face injustice, but it's a strange duality that exists. So, on the one hand, we have this visibility of women, of even free speech, that the army today is openly the subject of criticism on an individual and on an institutional level. And on the other, we have uh, the civil society and forums speaking out as often as they can without hopefully suffering the consequences of enforced disappearances, which tends to be more common in Balochistan. So when we look at how to counter extremism in Pakistan, uh, we look we need to look at both the non-violent forms and the explicit violent forms, which are enabled to flourish because of the unregulated proliferation of weapons, the ease with which weapons can be purchased and used. I'm reminded of the Turkish model. I mean, our beloved friend Turkey has so much to teach us. Back in the 1980s, Turkey conducted one of the most effective programs, as you well know, to collect illegal weapons. And they used the might of the armed forces, they used curfews, and they cleansed the Turkey of that time of this terrible means to propagate extremism. In Pakistan, like I suppose other countries, we have to address it with a very comprehensive, multi-sectoral, multi-dimensional manner. It has to begin in the home. It has to begin with the family. And that's a very broad, vague statement. How do you go about influencing 40 million families? There are about 40 million households. And we cannot, however, escape just because there's 40 million households doesn't mean we concentrate only on schools. Yes, schools come, but that is the second tier. In my humble opinion, it has to start with the family, the home, the community, the sect, the clan to which a family belongs. How fathers and mothers behave, their attitudes, what they inculcate in their children. And obviously, education, the curriculum comprehensively from primary to university. We have a situation so tragic in this country that in some universities you are not able to speak candidly. Fortunately, I've never been confronted violently, even though I speak candidly in every university I go to. But we have had the deaths, the killings of people in universities in the name of blasphemy or extremism. So it has to, of course, include education, but not just curriculum. It is the reorientation of tens of thousands of teachers, where we do not invest in the kind of training, capacity building, and re education. The re education of teachers, I think, is more important than the education of teachers. And in the public sphere as a whole, tendency to be intimidated by someone who comes up and talks in the name of religion or in the name of blasphemy. I think there's much greater work to be rendered by citizens who need to confront them in a peaceful, non-violent way, but challenge them. The formidable challenge comes in the form of social media. And this is not exclusive to Pakistan. Worldwide, we are facing this unprecedented growth and speed of increase in the quantum of knowledge and the ability to not only access that knowledge through multiple means, all converged into the palm of one's hand, but the ability to upload. Historically, media used to disseminate information, so one had to access it. But now, information for the first time is in a reverse spiral where you can upload anything you want. And you have to balance whether freedom of information or freedom of expression clashes with this unprincipled, unbridled freedom to upload hundreds of hours of footage and content onto YouTube every day or to other. How do you do this? Because in much of social media, which is beyond regulation, and I call it the challenge of information governance, countries far more advanced than Pakistan in terms of the capacity to govern are unable to figure out how do you govern Facebook, how do you govern Twitter, how do you govern TikTok, and so on. So the challenge of information governance is part of how we go about addressing the extremism issue. And lastly, I would say that in Pakistan itself, I find that within the state structure, a great vacuum of cohesion across horizontally within the federal government and vertically between the federal and the provincial governments for various reasons, and the non-existence de facto of credible and effective local government mechanisms, which is the grassroots of extremism. Those are the mechanisms with which we can cope and nip extremism in the bud. My humble and limited experience, before I conclude, I just want to share that as in my part of my voluntary work, at least 3 organizations which one has the honor to lead are frequently arranging interinstitutional dialogue at the low low is a terrible word, I should say at the highest levels of the union councils and the local thanas and the tehsils and the districts. And we find that if that effort is made and you get the police together with the local peshimam, the doctor who heads the local taluka hospital with the principal of the school, business leaders from the community, my God, the kind of advance you can make in appreciating other viewpoints and in reducing the sense of otherism. Because we are 97% Muslim, in any case, we think we are God's gift to mankind. And we don't regard enough, we don't give enough respect to the other 3% who are, in my opinion, the original Pakistanis. They were living on this land far before Pakistan came into being. And today it is the Hindus and the Christians and the Jains and the Buddhists and the Zoroastrians who are called the minorities, as if we are giving them the favor of becoming Pakistanis. It is they who have given us the favor of using their land. So dialogue at the micro level has to begin with the empowerment and the creation of local government systems and processes. It's a vast and multifaceted subject, and I'll conclude there and look forward to your interrogation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Javed Jabbar, for such an enlightened and historical perspective that you have given about state and society of our country, minorities and their expectations, and fantastic, very, very knowledgeable, wonderful intro and overall comprehensive overview. May I now request other team members, starting from Mr. Tariq Pervez, for his question or observation that you would like to ask from Senator Javed Jabbar. Tariq Pervez, sir.
Tarek, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Welcome, Mr. Javed Jabbar. It's certainly an honor and a privilege to have you here with us today. Very kind of you to spare some time for us. You gave a very impressive introductory remarks, very insightful indeed. My question would be very specific in the sense that, as Tarek Kosa has explained to you, we are looking for gaps in the laws relating to extremism. My question to you is that we have identified a number of gaps. One of the gaps is that in cases of blasphemy or even hate material, even after the registration of the case, for whatever reasons, the cases are not finalized on merit. And the basic reason for that is lack of political will. What I have specifically in mind are the cases which were registered in Karachi, for example, Shia Kafir, Shia Kafir. There were 3 successive, very big demonstrations where slogans were raised of Shia Kafir and hate material was distributed and everything was done. Cases were registered, and then as a result of the compromise or whatever, or lack of political will, the cases were not sent up to the courts. So the point I want to make here is that while yes, there are a number of factors responsible for poor investigation of cases, but at times it is the lack of political will to see the cases through, whether in the police or in the courts. What, in your view, would be should be done to strengthen the political will against extremism, so that government can sort of go strictly by law? If a law has been violated, then it should be taken to the court. So, and I know it's a difficult question in the sense that since it's a rare opportunity to be discussing it with an eminent person like you. So over to you.
Thank you very much for your gracious remarks, Tariq Parvez Saab. This is a dilemma. I mean, how you have identified this basic core reason, lack of political will, without trying to deflect from the importance of this question. I just want to say that it has to do with the degree of participation by citizens at large in political parties. Political parties today have, as you know, become the domain of families or cliques or elites that control these organizations through which political power is exercised. First of all, the overwhelming, the large majority of Pakistanis are not members of political parties. I mean, the percentage of membership in terms of relation to population is barely 1%. 1% of the people of Pakistan are actually members of political parties. How can political will be shaped unless these parties develop broader based participation, and from that participation displace these historical small cliques that do not want to raise issues that are uncomfortable or awkward or they think dangerous for them to raise? Only by broadening and deepening citizens' participation in parties, that's one. On the other hand, one way to do it is to consider legislation by which voting in elections is made compulsory. At the moment, as you know, on the average, through all the 12 elections we have held, voter participation has been either 50% or less. In a country where more than half the people don't even bother to vote, how can the will develop? There are 22 countries in the world which practice compulsory voting. Every citizen becomes responsible and conscious of the fact that he too has a responsibility to ensure that the leadership is reflecting popular will and benefit. So, on the one hand, through a process of mass mobilization, education, efforts by civil society, efforts by parties themselves, even if we think that they are not really sincere about it, uh, asking the Election Commission of Pakistan to make it mandatory for political parties to have a minimal number of registered members and to make that membership roster subject to scrutiny and authentication. And on the other, legislation to make voting compulsory. Voting compulsory, and secondly, to make representation authentically representative of the majority. As you know, in the first past the post system, which we use today in Pakistan, in India, and Britain, uh, shamelessly, we allow a person who is secured only 10% of the vote to become a representative of 100% of the voters. Because you have 5 candidates, one candidate, Mr. Tariq Parvez, gets one vote more than this ineligible, useless candidate called Javed Jabbar, and not to mention other much more illustrious candidates. And on the basis of that one vote being ahead, which is only 10,000 votes out of 1 lakh votes, you become the representative for 5 years. And the vast majority have not voted for you, have not, and this is no disrespect to you, I'm using you as an example. But what we have is an electoral system that neither represents the majority, nor in each constituency does it represent the majority of voters. So, where the will of the people needs to be facilitated and expressed, you make it compulsory for the winning candidate to secure 50% plus one vote, which truly, and if that doesn't happen in the first round, have a second round. And this is also done in other countries. So you make democratic processes and institutions more representative of political opinion. That's one. And then, of course, through education, through civil society efforts, unfortunately in Pakistan, civil society forums have so far been excessively dependent on foreign donors, well-meaning German foundations, or not so well-meaning American foundations, or British foundations. And due to the aspects of FATF and our own paranoia, in the last 2 to 3 years, the whole security approach to NGOs and civil society forums has become so difficult and oppressive that many of these well meaning foreign donors have retreated. So you have a situation where civil society is actually being weakened due to lack of adequate funding support. And in a country which is otherwise very generous and philanthropic, people love giving money to hospitals, to madrasas, to religious schools, etc., but they do not support think tanks or advocacy campaigns. So it has to take a combination of these things, and it can be done. It's going to be formidable. How to develop political will, I think it will take the next 5 to 10 years at least to go step by step, simultaneously and consecutively, to create that political will.
Thank you very
Thank you very much. I think the issue of political will has been very well addressed by you, showing its weaknesses within the system of political parties. May I now request DIG Shahzada Sultan if you have any question from Senator Javed Jabbar. Shahzada Sultan.
Sir, thank
You
you
are
very much.
mute, Shahzada.
Yes,
Unmute.
sir, I've just unmuted. Thank you very much. My question to the worthy author and the former senator is about the identity. I just want to understand, what do you think, sir, is how this extremism and violent extremism is related to the problems that we are facing with our identity? Is it just a manifestation of the way the power is being distributed and power is being wielded in this country? Is it just a manifestation or outcome or consequences of the state policy? Or we have some deeper serious issues with our identity in a country which is highly diversified, where a society which is not one society, which is a collection of so many societies, and where we still are struggling with the fundamental identity issue that who we are. Does this have something to do with what we are seeing in the country and the emergence of violence and the polarity and division and all those things, our inability to deal with this diversity?
Thank you. Thank you, Sultan Sahab. I am struck by how many of us with very good intent, such as yourself, feel that our country is extremely divided and uncertain and unclear about our identity. This view is partly an echo of how others see us and how we ourselves tend to see us. There's a journalist called Declan Walsh who became very famous some years ago when, after exposing that scandal in which fake universities had been set up by a certain group and thousands of fake degrees had been given on the internet, Declan Walsh wrote a series of investigative reports which eventually led to his expulsion from Pakistan, unfortunately. He's gone and written a book called The 9 Lives of Pakistan, Reports from a Divided Nation. MashaAllah, divided nation. Kya baat hai? I'm going to soon address a letter to Declan Walsh and say, what exactly do you think the United States of America is today? Do you think it is a united nation? I mean, the kind of polarization and polemics, the partisanship, the acrimony you find between Democrats and Republicans is so distressing. Look at the state of the United Kingdom. I mean, Brexit is one indicator. How narrow was the margin? Britain today is a thoroughly divided United Kingdom, despite being hundreds of years in existence. Scotland wants to leave the United Kingdom. They want a second referendum, and they say, we want to be part of Europe. We don't want to be part of the United Kingdom. And the less or the more said about India, the better. On the one hand, India gives the impression of being a very cohesive, united country, but there are deep schisms in Northeast India, in the Naxalite affected districts, which are well over 250 districts, in Kashmir, among the Muslim, blah, blah, blah. So, Pakistan, in the global context, in my view, is not unduly divided. What we are witnessing is the maturation of a very unusually created nation. No other country came into existence the way we have come into existence. On the one hand, 8,000 years of history and Mehergarh and Mohenjo-daro, and on the other, a name that has existed for only 83 years, 85 years, Pakistan. I mean, so identity needs time. Like, if I'm permitted to use the metaphor of wine in an Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Shahzad Sahab, I hope I'm not offending you if I say like good
Not at all.
wine.
Not at all. I
Acha,
mean, metaphors come from poetry, and poetry is, I think, can have the poetic
acha.
license.
Very good. So the older the wine, the better it tastes. Huh? The
Yeah.
older a name, the more resonant it becomes. Pakistan is a baby name. We are still adjusting to it. What a beautiful name it is. Look at the incredible quality of this name, that in 1971, the majority of the population rejects the name of Pakistan. But the minority holds on to this name. What a beautiful name it is, Pakistan. And in the past 49 years, we've been rebuilding meaning into Pakistan. So this struggle for national identity is going to continue. It is going to be marked by tension, by inner conflict, by debate, by vigorous disagreement. On the one hand, the need to build a strong center, and on the other, the need to ensure provincial autonomy and rights for the people who have lived here for thousands of years before Pakistan came into being. And the meshing together of Pakhtuns making Karachi the largest Pakhtun city in the world. How do the original inhabitants of Sindh look upon this phenomenon? There are people calling for Karachi to be separated from Sindh. I hope that never happens unless there is a complete restructuring of the whole federation. So I think, yes, it is a question of identity, and it is a question, as you say, of distribution of power. Wherever power has to be redistributed, whether between tiers of the state or in society itself, between classes, income classes, there is bound to be tension and conflict. And some of that is healthy. It is good, because if it does not happen, it means institutions have not developed well, and they're willing to give up ground, and they're willing to uh, concede areas that they should not concede. So we should look upon this process with a mixture of tolerance and acceptance of the inevitability of tension, and at the same time support those forces that that represent more democratic dimensions of our society. And we are, for a country which for 73 years we had 4 military interventions, and even now we think the military is calling the shots from behind the scenes. uh, is ISI bugging this, or is it listening in to this conversation? Tariq Khosa Saab, you should know the
Was
military
that
is, even if it is, doesn't matter. But for a country that has such a strong role for the military, look how democratically minded Pakistanis are. All year round, we have elections, Chamber of Commerce, bar associations, teachers associations, doctors, everyone is busy being candidates. My God, even you go down at the village or the community level, they are busy squabbling among themselves. कि नहीं जी committee बनेगी, नहीं जी ये सदर होगा, ये नायब सदर होगा. Mashallah, I mean, democracy is alive and well in Pakistan. And look at the irony. We are living next door to a beloved neighbor called Iran, where an elected parliament can be vetoed by an unelected single ayatollah. He can veto anything that the parliament passes. Nothing like that exists in Pakistan, except someone might say that the chief of army staff can veto something, but Khuda na khasta, I don't think General Bajwa or others will attempt to do that. They have done it in the past. And look at China, our most beloved friend. Huh? China is certainly not a pluralist democracy. So we are surrounded by, I mean, and the world's largest democracy, I'm sorry to say, India is the worst example of democracy, except for the regularity of holding elections. That I fully respect. They have done it religiously for the past 73 years. So, so there is much to commend the people of Pakistan and the system as we redistribute power, as we grapple with issues of identity. We believe in democracy and believe in listening to each other, but we don't do that enough, and that is why extremism is flourishing in some segments.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Jabbar, I would like, we have talked about political will, we've talked about national identity. You have written a beautiful article on Jinnah on 25th of December. So I'd like to ask you to conclude on the national purpose of Pakistan. Look at it from Jinnah's perspective. How would Jinnah, look at extremism and what Pakistan's national purpose was, visualized by our founding father? So, Senator Jabbar, with recently written article also, how would you conclude what our founding father's vision was in the context of extremism?
Thank you very much. You've really bowled me a googly. I mean, this is no way और वो googly को इस वक्त play करना इतना मुश्किल काम है. लेकिन I will make an attempt because you all know the answer. A man like Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the quintessence of an open-minded person, combined with an extraordinarily obstinate character. And that obstinacy is the reason why we got Pakistan. His willingness, his unwillingness to listen to any other alternative for Muslim national identity. And on the other, his openness to facts. The fact that he was a barrister and the fact that he excelled in the court, that even the most learned judges, whether they be British or at that time Indian, were obliged to listen to him, was not because of his emotion, but because of his reliance on hard facts. And on that basis, he had come to the conclusion that only a philosophical and political approach to balance, to moderation, to acceptance, to respect for everyone was the only way forward for Pakistan. I mean, it is reflected in the fact that that struggle that he conducted, he was struggling not only against the British and the Congress Party. At that time, Muslim political opinion in the original South Asia can be classified into about 7 broad categories. Out of those 7, as you know, the Deobandi school, the Barelvi school, the Khizr Hayat school of Muslims based in Punjab, the Khan Ghaffar Khan Muslims of Pakhtun, the Pakhtun areas, and other segments in other parts of South Asia and Bengal. 5 out of those 7 were opposed to the creation of Pakistan. So Mr. Jinnah was battling 3 adversaries at the same time: the Congress Party, the British government, which did not want the creation of Pakistan, contrary to the propaganda about him that he was really fronting for Britain. And on the third, he was battling his own fellow Muslims who had called him Kafir-e-Azam. But here was a man whose moderation and empathy for Muslims and non-Muslims, galvanized the vast majority of people to trust him rather than the extremists. The extremists who said Kafir Azam, or the extremists who said, no, there is no question of accepting a separate Muslim national identity. So by his word and by his deed, of course, there is the inevitable contradiction, because all human beings, contain contradictory impulses. As I mentioned in that essay you were kind enough to refer to, Koza, it was easier for him to be the father of a nation than to be the father of a daughter. Because when confronted with the daughter's choice of spouse, who happened to be Zoroastrian, he was not willing to accept. So, उस सेंस में वो उतने ही माशाल्लाह पाकिस्तानी खर दिमाग निकले जितने बाज वालदैन होते हैं. He was somehow not able to transcend that, but one can only understand he is after all human. But what did he do and say? उनकी जो भी आप हिस्सा देख लें, as far back as 1920, when he was being hailed as the ambassador of Muslim Hindu unity, and Sarojini Naidu was going into raptures about him. 1920 May, he warns Mahatma Gandhi. He says, you are introducing religion into politics, and then there will be no return. Because he had already noticed what Hindu Mahasabha, Arya Samaj, Bajrang Dal, others were up to. And when he saw that at the highest levels of political leadership of the Congress party, there was this Hindu dimension emerging, he felt it was a danger not only for Muslims, but for the whole polity of South Asia as a whole. So, I mean, he needs to be held up not only as the founder of Pakistan, but as the founder of moderation and the best bulwark we could offer against encouraging extremism. And we, in order to do that, we have to enable our generations of youth to study him and to continue learning from him and take a balanced view of his personality. And to also look at the paradox, that the other paradox of his life, which I find remarkable, that his inability to speak Urdu fluently. Now, Urdu, as you know, is the mother tongue of less than 9% of our population today. But even otherwise, Urdu was a lingua franca, but it was not a mother tongue. Yet so great was the trust of the people in his integrity that there is that famous Vakyana where right at the back of a spellbound audience came up this Western white correspondent. And he sat next to these people who were very obviously not literate. They were villagers, and they were listening rapt attention to Mr. Jinnah. So through an interpreter, he said, do you understand what he is saying? So the villager nodded, he said, shook his head, and he said, no. He said, so then he said, why are you listening so attentively? He said, I trust him. I trust him. Whatever he must be saying is the truth. Look at that sense of confidence in his integrity. So there is a nexus between integrity and the principle of balance and the principle of moderation. There is no integrity in extremism. There is a basic core of dishonesty, of denying the rights of others to exist if you are an extremist. And therefore, in all the different facets of Mr. Jinnah's life, there is so much to learn and to reflect upon and to further contemplate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Beautifully said. There is no integrity in extremism. And that really sums up the crux of your conversation, your heartfelt views. And Senator Javed Jabbar, we are proposing from an advocacy and from a civil society perspective, an alliance of civil society, a national alliance of civil society and NGOs against extremism. And we would be looking up to you for patronage, for support
okay.
to forge an alliance of civil society and NGOs against this curse of nationalism in our society. And we will
Very
look forward to your support. Thank
Very
you very much for your time. But your concluding sentiments, Senator Javed Jabbar, please.
Thank you so much, Tariq Khoza Saab, for having been so gracious as to invite me to participate. And I am delighted to learn that you have plans to form a national alliance. Presumably, it will not be on the lines of the Pakistan Democratic Movement. There will be, you will only be attempting to dethrone the evil of extremism and not some other entity. And on this national alliance against extremism, be rest assured, acting in my usual authoritarian, non-democratic manner, on behalf of at least two organizations which I have the honor of leading, Strengthening Participatory Organization. It's called SPO. We have a website, spopk.org. Our national center is in Islamabad. We have offices in all 4 provinces, and we partner with communities across the country, women and men and blah, blah, blah. On behalf of SPO, let me say that we will become a part of that alliance. Secondly, on behalf of Bah Bailey, which began its work in Tharparkar 35 years ago and continues to work in all parts of Sindh, and we are particularly in contact with the Hindu community of Sindh because we work with what is called the Dalits, the untouchables, who are discriminated against by their own community. Their own upper castes call them Dalits, untouchables. So we work with those people. And therefore, Bah Bailey would also be very happy to help you in your great and glorious effort. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time, Senator Javed Jabbar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Okay.
Khuda